morning of May 1st, 1960, CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers had been on a spying mission over Sverdlovsk, Russia, when he was shot down by Soviet anti-aircraft. The incident, come to be known as the U-2 incident, and the U.S. denial of it, had seriously maimed our relations with Soviet Russia for several more years. In 1954, the Soviets had developed their thermonuclear bomb, as well as a delivery system that allowed them to place the bomb anywhere in the world. The Bison bomber was a long-range jet-powered plane. Because of these and other technological advancements, President Eisenhower began to get scared about the imminent threat of nuclear war with Russia. He wanted to know what and how far along the Soviets were in everything they were doing militarily. In order to do this, he asked James Killian, the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to spearhead a team of scientists in exploring new intelligence weapons. Killian chose Edwin Lands, the president and founder of the Polaroid Camera Corporation, to help him. Together they determined that the best way to go was satellites with high-powered cameras on them. Unfortunately, this technology was still about 5 years into the future. President Eisenhower couldn't wait for 5 years to know what the Russians were up to. Both he and Killian decided that a high-altitude spy plane was the most beneficial way to gain information on the Soviets. They turned to Robert Armory, Chief of Intelligence for the CIA. Armory had been trying for 4 years to get an aircraft that could fly over 70,000 feet developed. In late 1954, Eisenhower approved Project Aquatone, a plan for the CIA to develop and deploy a long-range spy plane capable of flying beyond the reach of Soviet radars and ground-to-air missiles. Fortunately, Clarence Kelly Johnson had already been developing a plane that could fly at the previously unheard-of height of 70,000 feet. It was called the Lockheed CL-282. Although its lack of armament and traditional landing gear and poor maneuverability got it rejected by the Air Force, it was still a perfect candidate for the secret CIA mission. The design used a single jet engine that would allow it to carry the pilot and a camera over 70,000 feet, unarmed, unmarked, and undetected by Soviet air defense radars. Eisenhower's advisors said that no Soviet missile system or radar could detect or hit a plane at over 70,000 feet. Nevertheless, there was an obvious risk in flying over the USSR. With that in mind, the President offered a plan in 1955, known as Open Skies, to the Soviets that would give each country the right to fly reconnaissance missions over each other. Soon after, Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, publicly denounced the idea. Eisenhower authorized the first U-2 mission. While Eisenhower was having the U-2 developed, he was to meet with Khrushchev for a talk about placing a ban on nuclear arms testing.
From September 15th to the 27th of 1959, Nikita toured the United States and ended the visit with a summit with President Eisenhower to try to ease the Cold War tensions. Both leaders reacted favorably towards each other, being glad for a chance to show that there may be peace between the two great countries. By 1960, the Soviets had developed the SAM missiles, a high-altitude missile that could reach a height of above 65,000 feet, although not very accurately. The CIA had this knowledge, but thought that since it was not very accurate, the chances of a SAM missile actually hitting a U-2 were slim to none. The CIA also failed to tell President Eisenhower about the new SAM missile productions or Ike's top military aide, General Andrew Goodpaster. Americans wanted U-2 pictures of the Soviet bases before they had been hidden underground because the Soviets were beginning to produce ICBMs, or intercontinental ballistic missiles. Eisenhower authorized 2 more U-2 flights, and on April 9, 1960, the first flight was a success with no complaints from Moscow. The second was launched on May 1st from a secret military base in Peshawar, Pakistan. On May 2nd, Khrushchev announced that an American spy plane had been shot down over the region known as Sverdlovsk, and the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, had been captured. U.S. government officials insisted that it was a weather research plane, but Powers had already confessed his mission to the Russians. Gary Powers had a 3-day trial in August of 1960 in Moscow. He was sentenced to 10 years by the USSR Supreme Court's Military Cases Collegium. Powers spent only 21 months in prison and was exchanged for the Soviet pilot Rudolf Abel in February 1962.
Eisenhower admitted that he had issued the U-2 flights over a 3-year period for the safety of the United States. A few days later, at the opening session of the summit meeting in Paris, Khrushchev used the opportunity to demand an apology for the spying from Eisenhower. He also wanted the U.S. to comply to a list of other things. Eisenhower refused to apologize for defending his country, and the meeting ended at its beginning. The hopes for a nuclear testing ban treaty had crashed, along with the U-2 in Sverdlovsk.